welcome back to another mini. This week I am talking get-ups and get-downs. I posted a reel on Instagram last week that was called 6 Ways to Get Up, and I was getting up from my floor desk in 6 different ways, obviously, but I was trying to get the message across that even though in certain longevity tests you get scores that mean if you get up without using your hands, you get the highest score. The reason that I wanted to focus on the fact that even with the other movements where you're perhaps getting a 9 or an 8, they are, to my mind, almost more beneficial because they're the ones that are likely to outlast getting up without your hands, unless you practice it daily and unless you find it easy. But that's not the case for most. And I kind of wanted to reinforce the fact that actually the focus should be on getting up at all and also getting up with variety, because we often get into these autopilot ways of moving that don't really help us to progress with our mobility and our strength in the different ways that our body needs to get the most benefit and the most change. The funny thing, though, was about the reel that is still going quite wild, which is always exciting. And I've had lots of lovely new followers through it, so it's amazing. But so many people, it was to offer a free workshop, which I'll talk about the details of at the end. But it was also showing my desk. And most people, well, half the people, let's say, actually asked me, where did I get my desk from? Which is interesting because actually in the past, when I've shown my desk, I haven't had so many questions about it. People have been more likely to say, do you actually sit on the floor to work? And it made me think about how people see that, because I often will get responses to messages about sitting on the ground where people are kind of saying, well, why would I do that? Because it's going to be hard work to get up and down. Or the fact that, you wouldn't catch me there at all because why would I? What's the point? It's dirty. Or other statements like, I'm wearing the wrong clothes. How does that work? And obviously these are all our own barriers in a way. They're all things that we choose to use as a reason why we don't do something. And I think once you've chosen to actually do the thing, you realize that these barriers are just things we need to surpass. They're things that we can get past and that it probably would be beneficial to get past. And that's all the kind of thing that we grapple with on my main course. But it is funny because obviously if I'm on, for example, a Zoom call with people and they can see that my chairs behind me are sort of higher than my head and they're not used to my messaging or whatever, and they say, are you sitting on the floor? I often get quite a sort of interesting response, and lots of people will be stood up for calls these days, which is great. But the point is not, are you sat on the ground? The point is, are you sat on the ground, sitting on a chair, standing? Are you getting all that variety? Because obviously after an hour's call, even if you're standing, as I do when I record the podcast, you are not moving so much. You can move a little bit more when you're standing than when you're sitting, although you can obviously shift in the chair and wriggle like I do. But when you're on the ground, your body actually asks you to change position. You get nudges that you don't get when you're sat in a chair. Because when you're sat in a chair, not only are you pretty much in one position because you often forget to move, but also your body slightly goes to sleep so that you don't have that nudge of, I'm slightly uncomfortable and therefore please move your legs in a different way, please kneel. And the lovely thing about being on the floor is you have this wide repertoire, if you learn them, of different positions that you can get in. And obviously then, as I talked about on the reel, by naming each of the different get-ups with the moment that I would use them, more jokingly than anything, but you need to get up and down all the time, to go and grab a drink, to go to the loo, to go and answer the doorbell, to have a short break, to go and get your food, and so on. And the lovely thing as well is that if you turn off your camera on Zoom, don't know why I'm focusing on Zoom so much, you can wriggle back on the carpet if you're on a nice sort of padded space, which you're more likely to be if you're sitting on the ground. And you can do a movement break, and no one is any the wiser. So for me, it's the perfect solution. But it does take a while to get to the point that your body becomes more comfortable with it. But I think my point here is never to think about the fact that sitting on the ground has to be as comfortable as sitting on a chair, but that is a great thing, because that brings benefits that you don't even need to remember to move, because your body is asking you to move so often. In my course that I love, my signature course, Reclaim Everyday Ease, we learn ground sitting from the first week. And the reason I put it in so early is that I believe it's really important to start moving from the ground up, but also because it gives the body that time over the 8 weeks to adapt, for you to build up that habit and find the opportunities in your own daily life to start building it in. Because often, unless we really concentrate on the when, it's less likely it's actually going to happen. But also it gives your body that time to adapt. We need to be kind to our bodies to give them the time to adapt to any type of movement that we've not been doing. We want to not be forcing it, but we do want to be encouraging those inputs. And when I've had responses in the past that have felt a little bit less encouraging and perhaps made me wonder if anyone really does understand the importance of sitting on the ground in terms of building their mobility, their strength to get back up, and keeping that skill for life, so it's future-proofing them, I haven't been as sure, but this reel really did drive home that people were interested. They were curious about working at floor level, which is fantastic, because what it says to me was they're not so bothered about the test. And that sings to the same tune as me, where who cares about getting the top mark in a test? The most important thing is, how can I fit this type of movement into my life? So I was really pleased that seemed to resonate more. And the issue obviously with longevity tests is it makes you feel like if you can't do this one movement, your entire longevity is compromised. And that just feels very shamey, and it certainly lacks the ability to motivate most people. But my mission is different to that. Mine is really not about thinking about passing tests. It's about encouraging variety. It's about encouraging frequency of movement, thinking about movement throughout your whole life rather than just in exercise slots and passing tests to feel good about your movement. And I really enjoyed reading the feedback from my latest cohort of people who finished last week on my 8-week course, Reclaim Everyday Ease, which will be starting again at the end of April. And there is a waiting list on my website if you want to join and be told when it's starting. And seeing their development over time, and particularly how much they embraced getting down to the floor, spending time on the floor, and really seeing the benefit of how much that has affected their upright movement was absolutely brilliant. And I've got a couple of quotes that I want to read, because everything has been heartwarming, but these are a couple of great ones. Juliet said, "It has reinforced how much I want to care for my body, how it's capable and adaptable, and it can just adjust and open and soften and strengthen and move in greater ranges." And I just love the fact that she has seen all the opportunities for her body and is seeing the future so much more positively. And Leslie said, "Seeing it as movement rather than exercise and fitting it into daily life has really helped." And that's exactly what my work is all about. And obviously that shift then in their thinking and the way they're moving has really, really helped them move forward and create that transformation, and they're seeing those beneficial changes already in their body. And obviously we can't change everything in 8 weeks, but we can certainly set you up to make fantastic changes for the rest of your life. And that's the more realistic aim. And if you feel better and more confident and you see more movement possibilities around you within 8 weeks, then who knows where it can take you. But you don't have to suddenly go out and buy a floor desk unless you want to. You can construct it with shoe boxes, as I have for my wonderful podcast setup that I'm not going to show you. But the most important thing is embracing the fact that the ground and spending time there can bring you so much benefit in terms of getting up and down, as well as the movement when you're there. So if this idea in general is something that you know is missing in your life, and you really understand that it's something you want to embrace for the future, but you're not quite sure how to get started, then that workshop I was talking about before is called Reclaiming the Ground, and it is on Wednesday the 8th of March at 2:30 p.m. GMT. But if you can't catch it live, then of course there is always the replay. And all you need to do is look at the link below this video if you are on YouTube, and in the show notes if you are on Spotify or Apple. And in that workshop, we'll talk about that mindset shift that's needed, the ideas for how you can bring it into daily life. We'll have a couple of mini movement breaks so you can experience it. And in fact, someone during the workshop last time, even before the end of the call, had put in the chat how much better they felt just from sitting on the ground and moving with me during that hour. So sometimes we just need to prove it to ourselves. And at the end of that workshop, I'll also be sharing a bit more about the next cohort of Reclaim Everyday Ease. So do come along to the workshop, because there'll also be a special discount for the next cohort of Reclaim Everyday Ease in the live and recording of the workshop. And I'd love you to be there, and of course answer any questions at all at the end in the Q&A. So it's come to that time in the podcast where we do our podcast mini move, and today it obviously had to be getting down to the ground. So I'm going to use the deep hip hinge get down, which is the foundational movement that I coach clients initially. And I'm going to try and show you, so please ignore the mess in the room as I tilt down my screen, and I hope you can still hear me okay as well. The great thing about this get up, that's the microphone by the way, the great thing about this get up and get down is that it's strengthening for the back line. It fires the glutes, it builds hip strength, and there's also an element of balance. So come and join with me. So I want you to stand with your weight in your heels, and then we're going to hinge back. So keeping your body nice and tall, you're going to reach back with your rear, taking the weight behind your heels. And if you've got something behind you like a wall, hopefully you can feel your rear touching it. And that way you know that without bending your knees, you're hinging back nicely. Then we're going to bend the knees, making sure that the knees don't collapse towards each other, and lower down, reaching forward, and then slightly toppling through the feet. You've got to roll through the feet to reach the ground with one hand, then another, walking forwards, and then to come back up, keep your toes tucked, walk the hands away, and then walking them back, pushing into the hands, rolling through the feet to lift the knees, trying to get back to that hinge position, and then pushing up by unbending, and up we come. I hope that made sense. And now coming back to the microphone, I hope you could hear me. I haven't tested that one before, so fingers crossed. I wanted to leave you with a quote which was given to me on a card by a friend who obviously knows my work well and made me giggle. It says, "Never get down to the ground unless you have an exit strategy." And obviously that is playing on the fact that people do worry about struggling to get back up, but I really don't want that message to come across to you. What I want you to see it as is always get that exit strategy and come and build that strategy with me. In fact, build a whole repertoire of them, because then you will have the power and the mobility and the confidence to keep getting up for life. And if you practice them daily, you might find yourself one day thinking, thank goodness I did that.